Okay, in this video I'm going to be walking through adding validation using Spring inside your projects. Alright, so the starting point is the Camper MVC project after I just finished the last video, which was adding Spring Data JPA to it. Alright, so in the last video I created a camper repository class, a camper class from the database, and I added the camper repository into the camper controller. So at this point I'm using Spring Data JPA and I'm able to use the Spring validation. Alright, so there's not too much code that's needed for this. I've got a little bit of instructions inside October 5th's class. So it looks like this. Alright, so I'm just going to walk through the process of adding this. Alright, so the first thing I want to do is add some parameters to the controller method, which tells Spring to use to inject the binding result into the controller method, and also tells it to validate the model attribute. Okay, so inside the method that's used whenever I click the save on the add screen is the add submit. So whenever I click the save and submit that form, the action that's specified is /camper/add submit. Alright, so the model attribute I want to validate is the camper object, which is injected into this method. So I need to add the valid annotation. Another thing I find that can be useful to avoid some errors is putting these at the end of the method. Alright, so I'll add the valid annotation, which tells Spring to validate this attribute. And what it's going to use is remember whenever we built this entity class, right, there's a lot of annotations in here saying, alright, this is the ID, it's not optional, alright, the first name can't be null, it must be between 1 and 10 characters, the date of birth, it doesn't have the not null, so it's not a required field, but the maximum size is 10. So all this information is used in order to allow Spring to validate the object. Alright, so the only other thing I want to do to this method declaration is pass in the binding result. Right, I need to add it as well. Right, and I imported org Spring Framework validation binding result and the JavaX validation valid class. And that's what Spring is going to use to provide the validation. Okay, so once I did that, assuming I've submitted my form and I'm coming into this method, if there was validation problems, they're going to be contained in the result object. So I still want to do my validation here to make sure that the user is logged in, that they have a logged in user object in the session. Alright, so once I check that, I see the user is logged in, I want to check the validation. Alright, so that's the next piece. I need, this always happens. Anyway, so I need to bring in to check if there are errors in the result. Format that up. Alright. So if there are errors, the result has errors will come back to true. In that case, I'm just putting a note here in the console and I'm sending the user back to the add page. Alright. So this will send them back to the view, which matches /camper/add. And reminder, the views are in WebInf timeleaf. Alright, so camper add. So it would send them back to this page. Alright, so you notice that a bit of an issue with this is that we had some business validation provided in our camper validation BO. We checked, we used Java to check that there was a first name provided and that the date of birth was in a particular format. So I'll worry about that after. For now, I'm just going to get the Spring validation going. So I'm going to send them right back to the add page if there's any Spring validation errors. Alright, so the third piece is once I get back to this page, I want to indicate what the error was. Alright, and Spring allows me to break out the error based on the type. What I do, you can see in this syntax, I'm going to put it up here right here in the form, right before the fields start. But in the form, I want to put the any validation errors. Format that. Alright, so if there are any errors associated with the first name, the time leaf if statement is going to be true, and then I add this line item to the list. Alright, so all it's going to say is input is incorrect. Well, it's not going to say that because it's going to be replaced by the actual error that time leaf gives it. Alright, so first name is a required field. So I go look at first name here. Right, it can't be null, and the size has to be between 1 and 10. So Spring is going to generate an appropriate message based on those those annotations. Okay, so let's just run it now and see what happens. That's all the changes you have to make in order to turn it on. I mean, we'll improve it a bit after, but I want to make sure that it's working. It's sending them back to the page. All right, so I'm going to rerun my project. Okay, we're back again. The application is deployed. A minute or two has passed. So I'm going to log into the application and try to add a camper. All right, so I'll click my add link. Okay, so where was I? Oh yeah, somebody stopped by there. Anyway, I'm going to try to add a camper. What I'm going to do is not put in a first name and try to save. So what it should do is pop right back, and I should get a message associated with the first name. Alright, so I did. So size must be between 1 and 10. That's telling me that the first name is expected to be between 1 and 10. Okay, so it's working. That's good. I want to make it a little bit better. So I want to move this error down beside or below the first name. Alright. So I'll just flip back to the code. And my add page, so I'm just going to move this. And the good thing is that I can break the errors out associated with which field they belong with. Alright, so now if there's an error in the first name, it'll come out in the same column as the first name. Alright, that is just an HTML change, so I can just come back and test that right away. Refresh that page. There we go. So now it's showing up just below the input text box. You could manipulate it if you want to and have it over on the right if you just fool around with the formatting in the HTML. All right, but so what I want to do is add the same things for the last name and date of birth. All right, so they're going to come back. If you look at my controller, I just checked if there were any errors. If there were, I would send them back to the add page. Alright, so that's first name, last name, date of birth. Any of those things cause any validation errors, they're going to send it back. Alright, so I can just make those same changes. Alright, so I'm going to copy this. There and there. This one is the ones associated with date of birth. Date of birth. I'll make sure I also modify my last name one. I have to be careful. Alright, get each of these fields, have their errors set up. Let's go back. There should have been errors associated with these other ones. You see, the date of birth didn't have an error because it's not a required field. So it's okay to have 0 length. You have the last name and first name, both are required. Okay, so that's the Spring validation implemented on this page. There's a little bit more I'd like to take for people that aren't familiar quite with what was going on with the validation before. We had a Java method called validate camper in our business layer. Right in here, I was checking the first name and last name. I don't need to worry about that anymore. That's going to be handled by the Spring validation. All right, one thing I'd want to do, I still want to do, right, is check the format of the date of birth. So I still expect it to be YYYY-MM-DD format. We also implemented functionality that you had to be born in the last 16 years. So I still want to have that. That's business rules validation. All right, so I still want to have that. All right, so I still want to call this method. All right, so I don't want to be sending it back to the add just yet. So what I'm going to do is put my error flag. So there's no errors. If there are any Spring validation errors, I'm going to trip the flag. I'm not going to return just yet. All right, I'm going to let it continue. I'm going to do check the date of birth formatting and make sure it's in the last 16 years. All right, and if there's any errors there, I'm going to flip the flag to true as well. All right, and down here then, I'm going to put any messages in the model. All right, so these ones are the ones that came back after doing the date of birth validation from the business validation method here. All right, so I'm putting them in the model. So they'll be available to me on the form as well as the results that came back from the binding result. All right, so back to my add page, the ones that I put in the model here under messages, I'll change this to be DOB errors to be more appropriate. All right, so I'm going to I'll add an attribute with the handle DOB errors. And what I can do is access those over on my page. So I might as well put them down with the date of birth. Here they are here. So I'm not going to put them up here anymore generically at the top of the page. I'm going to get rid of those. I'm going to take them down with the date of birth. All right. So got my list of this one. The Spring validation on the date of birth is going to make sure that it's not longer than 10 characters. All right, so I'm also going to add line items here. So this is a little bit of HTML work. Just building up. This is going to go back and for each message in, this is called DOB errors. All right, so this is provided to me by whenever I put them in the model here. So the DOB errors is a list of strings that was added to the model before I went back to this view. All right, so DOB errors, and for each message in the date of birth errors, show it. All right, so let's give that a test, see what happens. Whoa, there we got a bunch of things, right? Whoa. I have to rerun my code because you see the errors. Initially, I used to be checking first name and last name, so I don't want to do that anymore. Let's just rerun the code and see if we can get. Remember, I had removed that from the start of my validate camper method here, so it's no longer supposed to check the first name and last name, but it's a good sign that it's working. So once I rerun this, I should get the latest code. Okay, so we're back. Another minute has passed. We're back into our application. I'm going to log in. All right, I'm going to try to add a camper. Gotta save them. All right. So you see that this one is now coming up saying that it has to be in YYYY-MM-DD format. All right. You can see they'll start to go away if I put go. Alright, so it's still failing based on the rules. If I put an old date, 1999, or the right format now, but it's not in the past 16 years. Well, I get another error, must be born after 2000. If they're born 2001, they'll be okay, and I should get this guy added now. There we go, we've got our validation updated inside our Camper MVC project. It's a combination of Spring validation and some custom business rules, but hopefully this helps.